Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the fifth module of our Educational Equity Indicator Series on how to improve student social emotional well-being. I am Ishay Collins, and I am honored to serve as the Director of the Equity Assistance Center South here at the Southern Education Foundation. And today I am joined by an amazing team of experts, Amy Berman, Deputy Director of the National Academy of Education, Dr. Robert Jagers, Andy Tucker, and Dr. Rose Prejean Harris. Today's webinar will focus on exploring the importance social emotional learning and behavior health plays in supporting and shaping a student's educational journey. In our time together, we will discuss the value of these non-academic supports and their profound impact on students. But before we begin, I would like to provide a little more information about the Equity Assistance Center South. We are one of the 4 Equity Assistance Centers in the nation funded by the United States Department of Education, which serves our public education systems by addressing issues of equity. We advise, assist, and serve public schools and districts in their work to provide more equitable opportunities for students in 4 key areas. Those areas are race, national origin, sex, and religion as required by law. We serve Region 2, which supports 11 states in the South, including the District of Columbia. We provide a range of technical assistance and training to school districts and agencies at no cost. And so we would love to work closely with you, and we'll share our contact information at the end of today's presentation. And we've also dropped our information in the chat. And so now I will turn it over to Ms. Berman with the National Academy of Education, who will facilitate today's session. You have it, Amy.
Thank you so much, Aisha. First, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'd also like to thank our panelists for their day in and day out dedication to the work described in this webinar and their willingness to share with us today. I'd also like to thank all of our partners at the Equity Assistance Center South and the staff of both of our organizations who worked very hard to prepare this webinar. At the NAED, I would particularly like to thank Tunisia Burns for all of her work for this preparation today. And now I want to turn and introduce you to our panelists. Robert Jagers serves as the Vice President of Research at the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, referred to as CASEL. Prior to joining CASEL, Dr. Jagers was a faculty member in the combined program in education and psychology at the University of Michigan. Among his various CASEL duties, Rob is leading work with partner districts to explore how social and emotional learning can be leveraged to promote equitable learning environments and equitable developmental outcomes for students from historically underserved groups. He has a particular interest in participatory approaches to SEL research and practice and their implications for the civic development of children and youth. Rose Prejean Harris, since 2017, has been the Director of Social and Emotional Learning for the Atlanta Public Schools. In this position, Dr. Prejean Harris is responsible for systemic SEL programming in the district. The department is strategically part of the Division of Academics in the Office of Teaching and Learning. Dr. Prejean Harris works directly with other departments to deepen the implementation of SEL through centering adult SEL to build the capacity of staff to both develop their own social emotional competencies and model those skills for students and other district stakeholders. Prior to her current role, Rose has 29 years of experience in K-12 education, working as a principal, assistant principal, counselor, and science teacher. Andy Tucker also joins us from CASEL and serves as their Director of Policy. Prior to joining CASEL, Mr. Tucker served as the Director of Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness at the Colorado Department of Education, where he led programs that supported K-12 students to prepare effectively for their future. Andy has been an educator for over 25 years with roles including secondary Spanish teacher, high school counselor, and building and school district level administrator. In his prior role as Director of Student Supports in Boulder Valley School District, Andy worked with all district stakeholders to implement comprehensive SEL curricula to support student success. Next slide, please. In 2019, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine came out with the Monitoring Educational Equity Consensus Report. A highly esteemed group of education experts and scholars formed the Committee on Developing Indicators of Educational Equity. The committee was formed to identify key indicators for measuring and monitoring the extent of equity in the nation's K-12 education system. The purpose of such indicators is not to track progress towards aggregate goals, such as that all students graduate from high school within 4 years, but to identify differences in progress towards that goal. Differences in students' family background and other characteristics, and differences in the conditions and structure in the education system that may affect students' education. A carefully chosen set of equity indicators can highlight disparities, provide a way to explore potential causes, and point towards possible improvements. Systemically collected indicators can allow valid comparisons within schools and of schools, districts, and states across a number of important student outcomes. No one indicator by itself can tell the full story, but taken together, a set of indicators can provide a detailed and nuanced picture that can inform and enlighten policymakers, policy implementers, state school boards and superintendents, educators, and researchers. In undertaking this task, the committee developed a set of 16 equity indicators, as well as proposed measures to assess disparities. Prior webinars by the Equity Assistance Center South, as Aisha mentioned at the beginning, this is their and our fifth module, examined other indicators, including access to rigorous coursework and disparate school discipline, and these can be found on the EACS website. This webinar addresses Equity Indicator 16, disparities in non-academic supports for student success, which we all know are critical for both non-academic success as well as academic success. As the report notes, there are many ways that schools can support students, including by supporting socio-emotional development, meeting the emotional, behavioral, and mental health needs of students, particularly those exposed to trauma and other stressors in their homes and communities, and addressing physical health, such as dental and medical screenings. Today, we focus primarily on supporting students' socio-emotional development, as well as addressing their emotional, behavioral, and mental health needs. And while the NASEM report is clear that supporting social and emotional learning is both critical and an issue of equity, the measures of success are not as clear as with other equity indicators. And we will hear more today from our panelists about not only the importance of the social emotional learning and how to enact it, but also how to measure success. Next slide, please. First, we will hear from Rob concerning the research supporting SEL and implementation strategies. Then Andy will describe the political landscape, both supporting and attacking SEL in schools. Then we will hear from Rose about the important work that the Atlanta Public Schools are doing to institute comprehensive social and emotional learning in their schools. I do want to note that throughout the slides, there are references and footnotes. For a full list of references, we have compiled a comprehensive bibliography that are the final slides of this presentation and will be shared on the EAC website. And also, following the presentations, we will have time for questions. Please feel free, as the presentations go along, to add questions in the chat, and we will keep track of them for the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob.
So first, thank you to colleagues at the Equity Assistance Center South and the National Academy of Education for inviting us to this webinar. My name is Rob Jagers. I'm, as Amy indicated, Vice President of Research at CASEL. And what I'm going to try to do is walk through some of the underlying research that drives much of our work with a particular focus on equity and excellence. So next slide, please. And in doing so, do some definitional work on what we mean by social and emotional learning, a little bit on what the research is telling us with regard to SEL benefits and some of the challenges or the research questions that remain to be answered. A little on developmental competencies, which tend to be the focus of much of the discussion about social and emotional learning. And then elaborating on context, which we feel are important under-examined aspects of the social and emotional learning process. And finally, a little bit about assessment in schools. So next slide, please. Historically, Castle and the field has organized around this particular definition that essentially looks at competence development in both children and adults as the acquisition of knowledge, attitudes, and skills having to do with emotions, goal setting, interpersonal relationships, and decision making. Next slide. In recent years, Castle has expanded this definition to be much more inclusive and nuanced with regard to what are the types of competencies and with particular attention to this issue of learning context and the environments and the relationships that foster healthy development of both young people and adults. Much more emphasis on the co-creation of thriving classrooms, schools, communities, and contributions to the broader society. Next slide. This provides an overview of Castle's systemic model of high quality implementation. Down the left-hand panel, and much of what follows will refer back to this overall picture. Down the left-hand side, you see inputs. Visioning is a first phase of an implementation process, and that's gathering together stakeholders to think about what they might do in terms of social and emotional learning in their given school community. There's an adult component where adults have to prepare themselves and develop capacity to actually help foster the kinds of relationships and learning environments that are necessary for our young people. And then attention to young people. And as part of this entire process, the utilization of data as a way to progress monitor and to check outcomes. In the center are it's what you typically refer to as the Castle wheel, which in the middle, you see what we'll call competence domains or buckets, self-management, self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills. Concentric circles have to do with the learning context in which those competencies manifest, but also are developed. And down the right-hand side are the types of outcomes that one would anticipate with a well-implemented SEL initiative. Here we have both short, intermediate, and longer-term outcomes. Next slide, please. Castle has been around since 1994, and over the 30-year span, there's been an accumulation of research, much of it from randomized control trials, so high quality, rigorous research design have begun to help us accumulate insights into what happens when you implement social and emotional learning programs with fidelity. And here you see the various positives. So as one might hope, improvement in social and emotional skills, attitudes, relationships, academic performance, which I think is a pivotal consideration, especially in these times, as well as student experiences of both classrooms and the school, climates, a decline in anxiety, emotional distress, so internalizing as well as externalizing behavior, so a reduction in conduct problems and substance use, and then longer term positive outcomes, which make SEL a wise investment and with a very high cost benefit ratio. Next slide. So as I alluded to earlier, these kinds of results from well-designed, rigorous studies give us confidence that in a time when we're, as a nation and as a world, very much concerned about academic recovery or learning loss, disengagement from school, mental health challenges as a function of the pandemic and post-pandemic, school safety, et cetera, and educator burnout, SEL has the potential to help to address, it is not a panacea, but can help to address some of these concerns as well as persistent and increasingly yawning opportunity gaps for students furthest from opportunity. Next slide, please. Some of the key research questions that loom, I alluded to the potential for differential influences and impacts, that is helping to actually close some of the opportunity gaps that persist. We could learn more about design features that are most helpful especially in under-resourced communities, and what are the processes associated with capacity building such that local stakeholders in diverse school communities can for themselves define, refine, and sustain an equitable learning system such that whatever the initiative, the SEL initiative actually can be sustained so that all children and adults can benefit. Next slide, please. A little bit about developmental competencies. Next slide. I mentioned the competence buckets and listed them for you. In our work that's focused on equity and excellence, we highlight or make focal identity, agency, belonging, collaborative problem solving, and curiosity as particularly relevant for young people and adults in under-resourced communities. Next slide. And the field is aligning around many of the competencies that we consider to be focal, with issues of identity, purpose, and agency, really helping young people with the sense of groundedness, contributing to their well-being, and ultimately to thriving both at an individual level as well as collective thriving, which implicates families, the school community, and the broader community. Next slide, please. This we felt was apt for this particular presentation because there is increased attention on adult social and emotional learning and programs, which suggest that each of the competencies and the relationships and experiences associated with healthy social and emotional growth and development and well-being occur over time. There are developmental continua that, and in each developmental phase, different aspects of development become more or less important. And this development does not stop. It starts in early childhood, as indicated here, and works through adulthood and into old age. Next slide, please. Next slide. One thing that I would point to, CASEL has a history of offering resources. One resource that's accessed probably above all others is the Guide to Evidence-Based SEL Programs. It's a searchable website where you can determine for yourselves what are the local criteria that are most meaningful to include demonstrated impact on desired outcomes from social and emotional academic areas of impact. We feature in this only studies that have been rigorously evaluated and have particular program features, and we rank the programs into select, which is the best, has the highest quality, promising, and SEL aligned. So I invite you to visit that resource. Next slide. This refers back to the initial characterization of high quality implementation, and reminds us that this learning occurs in classrooms, schools, family, and community. So family, school, community partnerships become an important feature of a healthy learning ecosystem for students, and that these ecosystems, as we refer to them, can be co-constructed, and schools and other local institutions are all implicated, and that data can and should be used to determine whether or not these initiatives are actually accomplishing their specified purpose. Next slide. Again, the importance of context cannot be underestimated. Historically, I think there's been a lot of attention to young people and their individual outcomes, but we have increasingly paid attention to learning contexts and adults and other young people who are in those contexts. Next slide, please. And this just articulates what we know about what high quality learning experiences look like. And we've tried to pay a lot of attention, especially to collaborative inquiry, given our earlier focus on collaborative problem solving, and realizing that the learning experiences, while SEL is typically thought of as a universal program that's implemented for all students, regardless of their standing in the school, we also recognize that a multi-tiered system allows us to support young people with differential needs. And this is consistent with a variety of models. And we just note here that community school models have the same kind of multi-tiered system that we would advocate for. Next slide, please. And these are just examples of collaborative inquiry, classroom or school-based programs where young people are invited to utilize academic content to actually address local concerns that they might have, work together with their peers, but also with adults in that regard. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. And these are just a couple of examples of the work that we've been trying to do to examine what is known and what needs to be known about the ways in which school, family, and ultimately community partnerships actually manifest themselves in diverse school communities. Here, it's building authentic school family partnerships, where we attempted to curate some of the existing literature, but then also to, in collaboration with external contributors, do some case studies so people would have some concrete examples. of how such partnerships can be formed. Next slide, please. The importance of educator well-being, I alluded to this earlier, so we've tried to do some work in this area. Clearly, educator stress and burnout are contributing to teacher shortages. There's emerging evidence, and we're paying increasing attention to adult-facing SEL programs that impact, and evidence would suggest those impact positively on adults, but also have an indirect effect on young people. As one might imagine, healthy adults lead to high quality experiences for young people and the types of positive outcomes we aspire towards. Next slide. Similar work or parallel work we're trying to do with families. Of course, families are the first educators of young people. We hear that often. There's a lot of variation among families, as we all know. How young people experience school is often informed by the experience that their parents have had. And we also know that educators seldom receive training on how to authentically engage families and partnerships. And when we look at the programs in the evidence-based guide that I alluded to earlier, only 4% of those roughly 90 programs actually have bi-directional interaction between families and schools. So this is a terribly important feature of the work going forward. Next slide. School community partnerships, obviously, we've alluded to earlier, our broader frame of school family community partnerships. There have been meta-analyses, so the research suggests that SEL and out-of-school times can be particularly impactful. I think the pandemic and post-pandemic experiences have taught us that the benefit of having other caring adults supporting education. And one thing that we do know is youth workers tend to be youth-centered, right? And have high quality relationship with young people, but there are really no existing national standards for the professional development of youth workers. So as we think about how they might support learning outcomes for young people, that this is a looming area of interest for us. Final slide, I believe. And this is just to acknowledge that there are many individuals, groups, and institutions within school communities who can all contribute to the well-being of young people. Amy mentioned early on some of the other features that fall in the basic services, food and housing, et cetera, being important for young people to be well prepared to come into learning environments. So again, an acknowledgement of the broader ecosystem that our young people work and play in. A comment about assessing SEL in schools. We mentioned that earlier. We've paid a lot of attention to outcome data. I think the utilization of data in the context of our work is becoming critically important. It's an accountability measure, but also progress monitoring across the array of contexts that we've alluded to and think are important to do systemic SEL. Specifying what are the appropriate SEL measures to be utilized, I think there's tremendous variation right now based on the nature of the programs. But I think looking at these methods, both quantitative or survey data, but also process data, so that we can get clear and nuanced pictures of the experiences of our young people and adults. Next slide. Thank you very much. Over to my colleague, Andy.
Thank you so much, Rob. I'm honored to follow you on this webinar. I also want to thank everyone for allowing me to be here today. Despite all of the excellent research and the body of research that Rob shared with us on the benefits of social and emotional learning, despite the clear impacts it has on students' well-being, on students' future readiness, on schools and communities, SEL has been wrapped up in some of the political polarization around education in our politics of today. It has been wrapped up with CRT. People view it as being the common phrase is that it's a Trojan horse for critical race theory, or that it's indoctrination of students. When we know that really what social and emotional learning is it's a process by which we work with students to develop essential skills that they'll need for life success while in supportive learning environments. Supporting families in partnership with families and communities. So it's really a tale of two stories. Next slide, please. It's a tale of two stories. It's a tale of social and emotional learning, creating a culture of understanding in schools versus this political polarization and these cultural wars that are occurring around education about how SEL is now a battleground in the classroom wars. I hope in this brief 10 minutes that I have with you today, I can show you that while SEL has been wrapped up and has been unfortunately partnered with some of these terms that people view as being so divisive in schools, SEL is not a winning platform, and I hope to provide you with some messaging and some tools to help combat some of this some of this rhetoric, some of this negative rhetoric. Next slide, please. So what you'll see here is a number of headlines from across the country, and showing that there's parent support for SEL. That SEL there's positive pushback to some of what's happening in some places like Florida. That there are connections between SEL and school safety and violence reduction. We know that happens, and in the wake of the Uvalde shooting, many connections between SEL and violence prevention were made. We know that there's that SEL can support academic achievement. It's not in conflict with academics, and doesn't take the place of academic achievement, and doesn't take time away from academic achievement. Instead, as Rob very well pointed out, the research shows very clearly that SEL supports academic achievement. But these attacks continued. But on the next slide, you're going to see a quote from an article that talks about how opposition to SEL is held by a very vocal minority. We know this. Many of whom may not have even had children in K-12 schools, and the views do not represent what the majority of parents really want. Indeed, on the next slide, you're going to see what the polling data shows. The polling data shows that 93% of parents say SEL is important in schools, that 83% of teachers say SEL improves academics. 75% of high schoolers say that SEL would help them personally, and does. And 92%, and this is a big one, 92% of employers say SEL skills are as important as technical skills in the workplace. We also know that despite the political rhetoric, that SEL, there's far more legislation happening in school out there in states around the country in support of social and emotional learning, as you'll see on this slide, as you will see on the next slide, which shows the number of anti-SEL bills that have been introduced. Notice the paucity here. I will also mention to you that SEL, these bills that have been introduced for us that would limit or prohibit SEL in schools, that despite the fact that there are a number of states that have introduced those bills, not a single one has passed. That is largely due to the fact that so many people support it. And when these bills are introduced in these state legislatures, people come out, um, there are, there's an extraordinary amount of testimony from folks that support social and emotional learning and the benefits that it has for students. For example, in the state of New Hampshire, there was a bill that was introduced that would have prohibited social and emotional learning in schools. There was an incredible outreach from the Leading with SEL Coalition and other organizations to encourage folks to testify against this bill. Included in that testimony is what you will see in the next slide that I think is a 2 minutes that is very much worth your time and will demonstrate the power of youth voice. Go ahead and play the video.
Honorable Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Cordelia Dubois. I'm 6 years old and in first grade at Abbott Downing School. My mom told me that there could be a new rule so kids couldn't take social emotional learning or SEL classes anymore. I did not like that because SEL class helps me stay calm and be happier. In kindergarten and first grade, we have SEL class every 6 days, just like gym and music. I like it, and so do other kids. They taught me what I could do when I got mad at school or at home. One thing they teach us is to use the toolbar when you get mad. First, you pause and breathe. That means to take 3 slow, deep breaths. Then you rewind. That means to think about what happened and why it made you feel that feeling. Last, you play. That means you make a good choice. Another thing we learned about is 5-finger deep breathing. That means you trace up when you breathe in on your finger and trace down when you breathe out. We also got to go outside for some of our SEL time. We learned about being kind on the playground. We had a really fun time with Mrs. Dutcher. Playworks class is also every 6 days. We learn fun playground games and how to be kind while we play. It's one of our favorite classes. We also learn about Choose Love at school. Some of the parts of Choose Love are courage and gratitude. For courage, we made a sign, and if a grown-up ever saw you do something that was brave, they'd give you a sticker and you'd put it on the sun. Gratitude means that you're thankful for something. We made a gratitude tree. Everyone in the school made a leaf. Mine said for my doll, Caitlin. A bunch of others said for my family. Also, the whole school learns about being respectful. It's one of the things on the signs in the school. It means to be kind to others. Thank you for taking the time to listen to what kids think about SEL. Please vote against House Bill 1473.
Thank you very much.
So as you can see, the power of student voice. I will tell you that committee, that was the House Education Committee in this New Hampshire legislature. That committee is evenly split, 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans, and that bill was tabled and defeated after that hearing by a vote of 19-1. So this is not a winning issue. This is not something that is passing. So hopefully you can see some hope. The social and emotional learning is supported much more broadly than it is villainized. So in order to help you, people on the ground, what do you do when you're hearing about these SEL misconceptions? On the next slide, you're going to hear if you hear this false trade-off that SEL it will harm other priorities such as academics, or that SEL is a distraction. We know that there is no either or between SEL and academics, as we spoke about earlier, and as Rob shared. The research shows clearly that SEL enhances academic achievement, mental wellness, and long-term outcomes. You can share that with people. On the next slide, you'll learn about another one. So for example, when you hear conspiracy theories like the one I shared earlier, that SEL is a Trojan horse for critical race theory, or that SEL is teaching children an outrageous claim such as SEL is grooming children into LGBTQ plus lifestyles. We can say that's not what I'm seeing in my child's school at all. SEL really looks like this. If you can share concrete examples like Cordelia did in that video, it really helps to move people in the direction of understanding what SEL is rather than a three-letter acronym that they don't understand. We try to separate fact from fiction. We try to address these misconceptions and help people recognize what a school looks like because SEL is in it. That practicing social and emotional, that students practice social and emotional skills, that they build supportive relationships with one another and with adults, that they have age-relevant and age-appropriate instruction, that there are adults modeling SEL skills, and that families and educators and students work together to learn these skills, that it is not schools indoctrinating students into ideologies with which parents may not believe. And finally, we encourage you to think about talking to people about what they believe that a school would look like without SEL. This is what a school might look like without SEL. It's a place where students don't develop the practical skills that prepare them for career in their lives, where they don't turn to help when they struggle, where they don't feel connected, where they feel like they don't matter, where they're lonely or bullied or isolated, where teachers don't have tools to engage students and manage their classrooms, and finally, where parents don't feel welcome in schools. SEL is inclusive, it is welcoming, it is equitable. We hope that you can share those messages broadly with your communities. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague and wonderful partner, Rose Prejean-Harris from Atlanta Public Schools.
Thank you, Andy, and welcome everyone. So today I would like to highlight the work that Atlanta Public Schools is doing to create inclusive learning environments through a systemic approach to culturally and linguistically responsive practices, which is also inclusive of both SEL and equity work in our district. Atlanta Public Schools has been a CASEL collaborating partner since 2015, and we truly appreciate the work that CASEL has helped us to build in Atlanta Public Schools with our SEL work. For context, right, Atlanta Public Schools is an urban setting, and we are the 7th largest school district in Georgia. We serve approximately 50,000 students across 90 schools and programs organized in 9 clusters. Our student population is comprised of approximately 71% African Americans, 16% white, 8% Latino, 4% 2 or more races, and 1% Asian. Next slide. APS is located in Fulton County, Georgia, and Atlanta, the city of Atlanta, is one of the most unequal cities in the United States for income disparity. When you look at the 2022 census data, the median income for white households is $124,048 in comparison to $49,526 for Black households. This data supports the need for an intentional look at our systems and a call to action for equity work within our district. After we returned from the pandemic, it became evident that we needed a way to bring our systems work together with equity as the through line. In fall of 2022, our APS senior leadership team participated in the Harvard University Public Education Leadership Project and developed a vision for successful implementation of our systems work based on our equity commitments and this theory of action. If we center our students by developing trusting relationships with students across the district and creating systems and structures that foster culturally responsive and joyful learning experiences, and back one, please. Back one. And committing to progress monitoring and making adjustments as needed, Then APS will consistently demonstrate it values students' access, voice and choice in the classroom. And as a result, we will meet the needs of all of our students, particularly those who are Black and Brown. This led to several strands of work, each headed by a division chief within the district. One of those strands also led to the development of a cross-functional committee focused on culturally and linguistically responsive practices. This committee created our current APS definition of CLRP. In our framework, we focus on these 6 areas: welcoming and affirming environments, inclusive curriculum and instruction, high expectations and rigorous instruction, design equitable systems, structures, and policies, equity-guided and data-informed decision-making, and ongoing support in professional learning. Today, I'm going to walk you through, at a very high level, all of these 6 areas and highlight how SEL and equity play a part in each of them. More importantly, this also allows us to measure the impact of practices that are often considered intangibles. First, we'll start with welcoming and affirming environments. In Atlanta, the SEL department falls under teaching and learning, and immediately we began to take a deeper look at how to create welcoming and affirming environments. We knew that we could not do this work without directly hearing from students. And so we put into place structures where we could hear student voice. One of these strategies also include fostering a sense of belonging for all of our students. And so within our district, we invited students to our district level expanded cabinet to hear from them directly. And then expanded cabinet members went directly into the schools to hear from students who were not invited to that district level meeting. From that, right, we understood what students were asking for in terms of what they needed from our system and in our system's work. So some examples of what happened as a result of that, and some of the practices that we have in place in Atlanta Public School, is that we have a standard of service of 60 minutes of explicit SEL instruction for all of our students in pre-K through 12. We are constantly building the capacity of all of our adults to understand and model SEL skills and competencies, and we are focused on the academic integration of SEL. We consider SEL the plate in Atlanta Public Schools, and everything else is piled on top of the plate. So it is foundational for promoting practices of inclusivity within our system. The next thing we focused on was making sure that we provide an inclusive curriculum and assessments, right, that are also inclusive and of our students. And our approach to that was really looking at what resources do we have in place? What activities do we have to engage students during instruction? And what are we doing to provide text and other resources that have diverse perspectives, imageries, and ways of assessing learning? So I cannot express to you or stress to you the importance of district level staff examining their own biases, right, when determining what these resources look like that we provide for our students within our classrooms, and also being able to have a way to discuss this when we're delivering professional learning opportunities for our teachers. In order for us to focus on each individual as a practitioner, right, our district level staff, our teaching and learning department, our Office of Academics, we use Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain as a book study. And as an example of some of the ways that we invite different perspective taking and inclusivity is through our SEL Books of the Month. So we have these books of the month that we highlight each and every month to go along with the themes and competencies, to just kind of make sure that we are inviting students into stories where they can see themselves just explored within the context of resources that we provide for them. That's just one example. We have plenty of other things that we do within the district also. Next slide. So again, stressing the importance of maintaining high expectations for students. When we look at those high expectations and rigorous instructional practices that we have, we can go back to the research that Hattie provides for us, right? That has been proven over and over that when we have teachers, right, that have collective efficacy, they understand who they are, they understand what they're doing. When they have true estimates, when teachers have high expectations for their students and they know that their students can achieve, they believe that. And when they leverage high leverage instructional practices, then we know that students have an opportunity to be their best selves and to achieve at high levels. So we provide those strategies for rigorous instructions that support diverse learners at the district level by helping teachers to understand their SEL skills and competencies, by helping them to build stronger relationships with their students, and having a strong sense of self-awareness for themselves and what they're actually walking into the classroom with. What are your implicit biases? How do you set those pieces aside? How are you aware, right, and know what they are, and how that sets the foundation for providing students with what they really need to feel safe and supportive in the learning environment itself. When we talk about designing equitable systems and policies, our board has directed our superintendent to make sure that all of these factors are in place for our schools to be able to be places where students are free from bias, right? Where they can be truly affirmed and that they are provided with resources that, that really they can see themselves in, that is differentiated based on their instructional needs. And that they're encouraged to advocate for themselves for both policy changes across the board and for learning materials within their classrooms. Next slide. So one of the ways that we talk about providing those equitable systems and policies, right, is like really leveraging district level staff being able to self-examine and reflect on what they're providing, their personal beliefs and assumptions, being very true to our definition of culturally and linguistically responsive practices, and really fostering inclusive leadership culture that really helps to build our school leaders to do the same things and to provide that for their teachers and staff so that teachers and staff can demonstrate their understanding of what that means to be affirming in their practices for their students and the pedagogical things that they choose to do within their classroom. With that, students then should feel connected, respected, and embraced and challenged, right? And have voice, choice, and see themselves reflected in the classroom, and they're able to be vulnerable enough to be safe in order to be joyful, right, in their learning and graduate ready for college and career. We do that through our equity guided decision making, and every department within Atlanta Public Schools uses this equity guided decision making tool in order to make decisions. So from our HR hiring practices to finance to transportation to academics to student supports, we look through all of these things through a strategic equity framework and a decision-making tool that helps us to really examine whether or not we're providing the best opportunities for our students. Next slide. So this is just a brief example of what that tool looks like, what the process looks like, and how it's embedded into the work that we do. Next slide. So as a foundation, again, SEL is a foundation for that work. Our SEL implementation, again, in Atlanta Public Schools started in 2015-16 with planning and onboarding a cohort of schools, a small cohort of schools, followed by an additional cohort, and leading to the practices that we do today with a real focus on adult SEL, academic integration, and restorative practices within our district. Next slide. Again, this is in partnership with CASEL, our partners, and we look through the capacity building concepts through the lens of transformative SEL, which Rob described earlier in this presentation. Next slide. So what do these ongoing professional learning and supports look like? It looks like shared resources for ongoing professional development using restorative practices, implicit bias training, SEL trainings, trauma-informed practices, youth mental health first aid, culturally and linguistically responsive lesson planning strategies, and personalized learning. And we encourage a collaboration and networking among all of our educators. This work has to be done in coherence. And so all of our departments work together collaboratively to make sure that all of our work is aligned. So from finance, being able to provide the correct budgets to us so that we can buy the appropriate materials for our students, for us really as adults setting the legwork and understanding what our students need in order to be able to provide the appropriate learning supports. Next slide. So when we think about our students as value add, Gloria Ladson-Billings said it best. As educators, we need to value and celebrate the diversity of students and intentionally integrate the funds of knowledge they bring from their homes and communities into classroom instruction. And that's exactly what we try to do in terms of building healthy and strong relationships between adults and students through SEL skills and competencies and trainings. Next slide. As part of that work, right, it's very hard to measure, as Rob said, it's very hard to measure some of those intangibles. And so our equity department has helped us to look at our key performance indicators by building this Otis dashboard that helps us to look at opportunities across the city of Atlanta, right? What are those things that we are missing in terms of gaps of services for our students? Tangibles and intangibles within our school district itself, right? What are those things that we are doing in order to impact student outcomes? And then our systems level work itself, right? What do we need to continue to do better in order for us to have equitable systems for our students? One way that you can look at some of the work that we are doing is to go to our APS website that says APS Connects. And you can look at our survey data that we've given over the past 2 years to our students and look at specifically our sense of belonging data, how that data has also increased for Atlanta Public Schools, and all of the questions and kind of indicators that we ask our students in order to be able to measure some of those intangible pieces. We also provide universal screeners and supports in APS through BAS3 BEST. I also invite you to look at our board goals and guardrails, right? So each month, the superintendent and our boards participate in these open talks around our student outcome data. And you can view our board meetings the first Monday of each month, or you can go back to our board meetings minutes and look at examples of this practice through the board reports. Next slide. And again, Atlanta Public School is building the capacity of our leaders and staff and educators to be culturally and linguistically responsive practitioners that foster a caring culture of equity, trust, and collaboration, and create a system that prepares to graduate scholars who are ready for college, career, and life. Thank you. I think we're going to open the floor now for questions and answers. And also you are provided a link directly to our APS public facing survey connection site so that you can have just a view of some of the data that we're collecting here in Atlanta Public Schools to help drive our work.
Thank you so much, Rose. I'm just going to ask Tunisia to just sort of run through real quick so people can see our extensive bibliography. And then we will take down the slides while we do questions and answers. But at the end, we'll come back with a survey for people to take. As you can see, there are a lot of them that the panelists came up with. So thank them so much. So yeah, if we can take down the slides, that would be great. And then we can do some Q&A. And I think we need to also have Andy join us for this part. Please, people put questions in the Q&A part of it, stick them in the chat. We all just did a webinar a month ago and Zoom has updated all these different features. And so a lot of the panelists are struggling to write back to all of the attendees. So we apologize for that, but we're trying to get the information out. I am actually going to start with a question that it's hard not to think about hearing all three of your presentations. All of you spoke about the importance of adult SEL to ensure modeling and equitable, unbiased, and affirming practices in classrooms. You described methods where educators need to examine their own potential biases to ensure social and emotional development for students. We know that there's a lot of PD required of teachers and that this is really hard work that you're talking about doing. But how do we get buy-in from educators to do this? What have been successful methods that you have found?
So I guess I'll start. So for us, we embed SEL into all of our professional learning, no matter what department you're in. So we collectively work and collaboratively work together with every single department and do SEL trainings. And we started with CASEL's 3 signature practices, right? So if you do the basics, an inclusive welcome that really connects to you, it connects the people together in the room, and connected to the learning that that's about to occur in the room, followed by an engaging work period where you're really like tackling the issues, right? So even if I'm talking about academic content, I can still tackle from a storytelling lens what my implicit biases might be within that particular professional learning, and then follow up with like a reflective close, right? Like, how does this all, bringing it all together, right? How do I personally include these practices, but understand who I am and what I'm bringing into the room, and making sure that that doesn't inhibit learning for anybody else, not for students or any of the other adults who are with me. But like, I'm really aware of how these pieces are a part of me. We all have these implicit biases, right? How that piece is a part of me and how I can just self-manage those pieces so that it doesn't inhibit learning or safety for anyone else in the room. And so just including those are like modeling those 3 signature practices and making sure that the intentionality is around the discussion around the skills and the competencies in any type of setting, in any professional meeting, in any type of professional learning, is just a model of the work that we do. SEL is part of the structure of our systems work, period, in Atlanta Public Schools. And so people like own it because it's really our story.
I'll add that I think more and more what we're seeing, Amy, along these lines is states are beginning to include instruction on SEL in teacher preparation programs and educator preparation programs, which I think is a great model that states can follow to really help people to build, to learn how to teach SEL. And within that is definitely some look at themselves. and to look at their own implicit biases and own to have their own self-awareness skills so that they can then share those with students. But it's part of the educator prep programs more and more as part of the standards for educator prep programs in states around the country. A good one to look at as an example would be Oregon. Oregon has done some great work in this area.
Thank you both. Another question that has come in is how do educators collaborate with families in SEL work? We know that they're an integral part of this, and Rob and Rose both talked about it. But what are the actual steps that are being taken to have that collaboration happen?
Sure, I'll jump in and then turn it over to Rose. There are a range of approaches and practices that schools and districts are to have taken and are taking. From the educator perspective, I think my understanding, coming out of school education or being a faculty member in school education, is that it's just not a lot of time and attention is spent prepping educators to have the types of relationships that are constructive, especially when there are differences of various sorts between the teaching staff and the caregivers and other adults and children in the community. So there are a number of different ways to get to know your stakeholders, to include community walks, book study. There are the standard kinds of back to school nights and parent teacher conferences, et cetera. And those things can be done in ways that make them more inviting rather than less inviting. Because everyone's busy, food is always a nice way to build relationships, especially if everybody is contributing in some form or fashion to the food. Childcare is always an important feature, given that you're dealing with families with children almost by definition. So these types of activities, I think, help build that culture. But I think Andy's point about pre-service work for educators is also very, very important, to give them a sense that that's within the scope of what creates the kind of learning environments that would benefit the young people, but them as well.
And I'll just bring it back to our culturally and linguistically responsive practices work. That the first thing was welcoming and affirming environments. And that's not just in the classroom. That's in any building that you walk in Atlanta Public Schools, right? So that means that everybody has to understand, how do we create welcoming and affirming environments, right? How do we greet people? How do we take the opportunity to build relationships, even over the phone? Like, if I answer the phone in Atlanta Public Schools, I should feel like I belong. And so that's the importance of coherence work across the district. Everyone should understand that everybody who walks into the building, employee to employee, employee to parent, parent to student, student to adults, student to student, everybody has to have ownership of creating this welcoming and affirming environment. And it's how we talk to each other, how we greet each other, our body language, all of those things, how we listen to each other. And we do trainings across the board, right? We do trainings with teachers, we do trainings with parents, parent liaisons. So everybody has to understand what that culture looks like, and how we create that culture. Even if you look at our board meetings, right? Even our board members, they have to model those pieces for our whole entire community. And I think our structure, I love our structure of our board meeting, because we have an opportunity to hear from community members, right? and they feel safe enough to come into the board environment and have those conversations with our board members. We have the opportunity to have interactions, positive interactions with our parents, right? And that comes from every single conversation, every single interaction. And that's first us being aware of who we are, right? And knowing that we need to understand how to be able to build those bridges between ourselves and our communities.
I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, and also just thinking about the past work that I've done, knowing that sometimes English language learner communities and their families sometimes tend to be the last people that come to the schools, and sometimes are the most important and the hardest to engage, right? Because there's other legal issues. There might be other, for some certain families, like other issues going on that make it complicated, especially in the political climate that we're in right now. So some of these questions are: what ways are social emotional learning helping English learners and migrant youth navigate post-traumatic stressors and achieve a sense of belonging? And also, like, how can organizations think about really informing parents of some of these communities of the importance of social emotional learning and get them involved?
So I'm just gonna shout out our multilingual services director, Margaret McKenzie. Every Wednesday, we have a Zoom meeting specifically for parents, Latino parents, in that particular community, and it has grown. It's probably one of our most attended, opportunities for parent engagement opportunities. And she has really embraced the community, knocked on doors, and made sure that parents understood that they were welcome. And this is those Wednesday meetings are like an opportunity for them to voice concerns, to listen to all of the programming that is available for them, and then have an opportunity to advocate for themselves and their students and the Latino community. And so I think, again, creating the forum, building the relationships, making sure that they understand what's in place in order for them to be able to advocate for themselves and to know that it's okay and it's a safe place to do it is really helpful. And our parent liaisons, Margaret's department, SEL, everybody attends those particular meetings, right? They have an opportunity to hear from a wide range of departments within APS and understand what services are available to them. And then I'm just going to give one more shout out to Atlanta Public Schools, because we have a centralized office that's not necessarily, because of where we're located downtown, is not necessarily the most advantageous for parents. And so we're opening a new parent center that is easily accessible to parents, where they can get services right there available to them, and they don't have to pay for parking anymore, right? So, like, just understanding what those gaps and those opportunities are within your district, and listening to the needs of your parent community and the Latino community in particular, I think is a very important step. So building forums, making services accessible, and then making sure that they understand that they are a wanted part of the community, and that they belong just as much as anyone else.
And the only thing I would add to Rose's description of what would be considered best practice, right? That's outstanding work. Is that on our end, we provide tools and resources to include a caregiver discussion series and ambassadorship that ultimately, well, it's run by local caregivers, to begin to empower them around how to do some self-exploration, but then also how to engage schools and school personnel. And those are all of our resources, or many of our resources have been translated. So we're trying to make sure that we can get, although we're a little distal from the school communities that Rose is actually working in, we are trying to make sure the resources that we do provide have appropriate translation and can get in the hands of both leaders, but also family members as well.
Yeah, no, last thing I'll add here is I think that another thing that we see districts and schools around the country doing is really providing opportunities for parents in their own communities too, and working with community members and community organizations to help them understand what SEL is so they can share. And some of what Rob shared earlier was around the power of social and emotional learning and out of school time programs and places like that. So working with a partner community organizations where parents and families already are, where they're in their communities, to help share this information can be extraordinarily valuable for any community, and the Latino community in particular.
Thank you all. A final question goes back to what I highlighted in my introduction about the difficulty of doing this, and it's one of the questions that we have in the chat, is do you have any more additional guidance for specific ways to evaluate the effectiveness of SEL, and what are maintenance of effort requirements around it?
Yeah, great question. It has multiple facets to it. There's in some districts and schools that we work at, there are capacity issues, right? They're simply not research and evaluation teams that can help with the kind of data collection efforts that are required, because in many respects, you need alignment between the program, the program content and the focus of the program and the SEL assessment that you're utilizing. And that has to co-occur with all of the other types of assessments that are going on. So that, we talk about academic integration. How do you weave SEL into the fabric of a school community, a district, and the like? This assessment piece would be part and parcel of that. And so some careful attention to the alignment between the programs that are being selected and the constructs that are being, the things that are being assessed on the various surveys. And then, there are walkthrough tools that can be utilized to look at the environment. It's important, I think, to get student experience data, not just outcome data, but also how some of the programming, both academic, social, and emotional, is landing with young people. What's their experience of that? But also to include educator perspectives as well. And increasingly, I think people are paying attention to educator outcome data from the types of professional learning opportunities that Rose was describing as well. Because not, similar to young people, educators, adults start in a place, programs are introduced, and one would expect improvement. And if not, then then whatever the programming is needs to be modified and refined in order to get the desired experience and outcomes.
And I'll just add just a little. Again, it goes back to the coherence work. It goes back through having solid and in concrete ways to measure, right? So we in Atlanta Public Schools, we have SEL learning standards that we can align to walk through rubrics for our explicit instruction. We have created a dashboard. Our terrific assessment department, we're fortunate enough to have one, has created a dashboard for us so that we can look at who's actually teaching the lessons, right? And then how those pieces are aligning to attendance and behavior data. And so it's really about being specific and being coherent in terms of using measurements, right? Because you don't want to measure something that is not true. So you want to make sure that that you're not just tossing it up in the air, but that you have like some very specific things that you are using to measure, and that you're taking a holistic picture of both quantitative and qualitative data in order to be able to assess the effectiveness of SEL programming within your district.
Thanks, Rose. Another question just came in, and it's asking if you are considering the use of generative AI in classrooms in collaboration with social emotional learning.
I think that what we're learning is the generative AI gives even more, lifts the importance of SEL up even higher, right? Having the social skills that AI cannot replace. The AI is not going to be able to replace many of the things that we teach children, which is how to manage what that SEL teaches children, which is how to manage emotions, how to build relationships, how to get along, how to collaborate, how to do understand each other's perspectives, etc. So there's probably more call for SEL in the era of generative AI.
I would agree. And we need, to remember that AI is a tool. And so we have the opportunity to figure out how that tool can better facilitate the type of work that Andy just described, without assuming that the tool can replace the people actually doing the teaching and learning.
So I want to end by really thanking our panelists for joining us today and providing all of this information. If we walk away with sort of some of the bigger picture things, it's hard not to think about what Rose said, SEL is the plate and everything else is piled on top of it, and how important the plate is, right? As a person with children, that plate has been very important, and it is something that is not always used. So how important the plate is, Andy ending with saying, right, SEL is inclusive, welcoming, and equitable. All things that we know and need to keep sharing with our communities. So I want to thank you all. I apologize again that I cannot write into the webinar chat, but there are several people who have been asking for resources. This webinar will be on the Equity Assistance South website, as will the entire bibliography with all of the resources, and we'll be sure to include Rose's resources in that as well. So I just want to thank everybody, and I'm going to turn it back over to Aisha.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you, Rob, Andy, and Rose for this informative session. Again, we would love your feedback on today's session. And so we will put the link, a survey link in the chat, and we'd love to have your input. And also just piggybacking off of Amy, we'll send a follow-up email along with the survey, this webinar recording, and additional resources. And so if you would like to inquire about our services or connect with us, you could just visit the EAC or the Equity Assistance Center South web address, which is www.eacsouth.org, or send us an email at eacsouth@southerneducation.org. Thank you all again so much for your time and for joining us, and you have a great day.